Good morning and welcome to our webcast here today with a new intro that we just prepared. I'm Henrik Zangenberg and joining me today is Clara.
My name is Clara and I'm a senior consultant here at Zangenberg.
And we've spent a lot of time helping clients improve their vendor management and today we have assembled some of the learnings and experiences from that, and we'll try to share with you some insights into what it means to do proper vendor management, and we will give you at the end the cowboy tricks. How to health check your own agreements to ensure that your vendor management is on top. So stay tuned for the latter part with some new condensed advices on how to identify just those deals and relationships where you should go in and do some improvement. But I think we'll just head off here on the presentation, and
you can say that if we should take what can you get of optimizing your vendor management? You will get savings and cost avoidance, and later on we will get into why you will get save and cost avoidance. More specifically, we'll also give you some hints about where the money is usually hidden. You will improve your problem solving and conflict resolution, mainly with your vendors. And you will gain a better relationship between client and vendor. So you will gain a better relationship with your vendors when you improve your vendor management.
Yeah, I think it's important to say vendor management is about making sure you get what you pay for and you don't overpay. So the savings and cost avoidance is obviously an important thing. But the two next ones, the two next we had here on problem solving, conflict resolution, and relationship is, in my opinion, in many cases equally or perhaps even more important, because we see a lot of clients that experience the problems in the vendor relationship, and that gives conflicts, it gives bad price. I mean that leads to a whole lot of problems.
Yeah, and on that note, it's also easier to sustain and retain your quality standards. So where the next one is, you will actually get the services that match your actual needs, so you will get what you pay for. That is like the basics of 5 key improvements that you will get by leveraging strategic vendor management.
And some of you will be in a situation where you have pain in one or several of these 5 boxes. And obviously, when you design your processes, you need to focus on the pain areas, but also on the areas that works today that needs to work tomorrow as well. So make sure that you have all these 5 in mind, and also prioritize according to where it's really important to you. So obviously, if you are in a cost-cutting period of the company's life, cost savings and cost avoidance is of course very important. But if you are in a situation with problematic vendor relationships, that could be the main focus of your process design.
And this is the classic example that we always tell our clients, that staffing for vendor management is like hiring parking guards in a big city. And it's like you will ensure that people will park their cars at the right places, and if not, you will pay them a fee. And the first many guards in a big city, they will bring in more money than they cost. And that's like the classic example that we always provide our clients, that if you increase your staffing for vendor management, they will bring in more money than they cost, because they will ensure that you will actually get what you pay for, you will pay the right amount of money, etc., etc.
Yeah, and it also points to one very, very important learning from many of our clients. You need to have the process in place, you need to have the standards in place, you need to have, there's a lot of practical things you need to have in place, and we'll go through them. But first and last, you need to have the people that gets up in the morning and do these things. And if you have a lot of contracts with a lot of clients, well, then you need more vendor management people in your organization than if you had fewer. So this scales.
And we will provide you some examples later on. We have some examples from a medium company and then a large company where we also take into account the complexity of the agreements and how much staffing you will actually need to manage all agreements.
Yeah, so stay tuned. You will get some insights as to how many people you should be if you can calculate it out from our examples. No, but we'll give you some hints on that as well.
Yeah, so the four main drivers that lead to reduction in the expenditure of IT services is one of the operating unit services, unit prices decrease over time. So that's like a main example that we also always provide that our clients, we have this index that also shows it very clearly that the operating unit prices has decreased over time because of technology development and massive investments in R&D in the IT infrastructure. So when you have an IT service agreement, you should expect that these price reductions should be reflected in your agreements.
Yeah, this is something we've preached about on many of our webcasts that ITO outsourcing agreements is always an area you should look into, because most likely there will be money to be saved by renegotiating or perhaps even renewing or extending the contracts. The second one is software agreements represent an area where many companies can actually find savings. In some instances, they can find cost avoidance because the software vendors are right now raising their prices. But through due diligence and good vendor management, you should be able to lower the prices on some pieces of software and at least keep the prices constant on the rest. But this requires vendor management to actually achieve that.
And I think it's also important to note on the software part that software is very arbitrarily priced. So as you can see in the small figure that we have some very large contracts that have gained the same LSP price as the small contracts. So there isn't, how can you say, a market price for software. It's very arbitrarily priced, where prepping for negotiation in the vendor management is a crucial part in pricing of the software. And the maintenance level reduces over time. This is what we also see in the market, that when you, I can say, take on a new software or system, the number of incidents and service requests, they reduce over time, which should be reflected in the price as well. So as the operational maturity gains over time, you will get higher reliability and efficiency, which will reduce the number of incidents and service requests and problems as well, which leads to a lower maintenance level and should reduce the overall cost of the IT maintenance.
In the long tail of contracts, you will have most likely a lot of small maintenance contracts. So you have had systems developed over time by different companies, and right now you're paying them a fee to make sure that bugs are corrected, that the system is updated to latest version of the OS or whatever. So you pay all of these companies a lot of money. Totally, you pay them a lot of money. Individually, you don't pay them that much money for maintaining a system. And that tends to be a constant price over time, while, as Clara just mentioned, the effort behind decreases drastically. So going through your long tail of AMS, application maintenance and application management contracts is always a good idea, and you could basically industrialize that in a way where you go through, say, 20 contracts and just look at the development over time, take them into a meeting and ask whether they would be willing to lower the price to reflect the current level, because the alternative would be that you would consolidate a number of these contracts into a fewer contracts with a single outsourcing vendor. That tends to work. So that is one way of industrializing the management of the long tail in terms of maintenance contracts. The last part here is really anything in IT is a P times Q thing. So there's a volume and there's a unit price. And we've talked about the unit price on the 3 previous examples here. The fourth one is really about the Q, about the quantity. So are you sure that you have the right number of servers, the right number of Office licenses, the right number or the right amount of storage, that the network is basically that you're paying for outsourced management of too many network components, and you can keep on going. So is the capacity utilized properly? And one way to start is in the data center, and is to look at the server utilization, which is usually low. And often there's often a lot of money to be saved by simply right-sizing the capacity that you are buying. And then after that, begin talking about the unit prices of that remaining capacity. Okay, so we've put together this map of processes that we believe makes up vendor management. And I think at the end we will also point to a number of quarterly analytics research articles that goes into detail with several of these processes. But this is kind of the overall process map that you should be looking at. And depending on the complexity and the size of your vendor management task, I mean, how many vendors, how many contracts, what's the financial volume of what you're working with, you should be more or less focused on getting these processes designed and implemented. But of course, if you have a significant spend with external vendors, these are the processes you should have in place. So just to take it very briefly, so there's what we call the primary contract value chain, and those are the processes that you go through over the lifespan of a contract. So you specify your requirements, you do a vendor selection, or you do an RFP. If you're a public sector entity, that second box is of course mandatory for you in most of the cases. So there's a compliance issue there that you need to make sure that you do it, probably you do it with all the contracts at the right time and so on. Then you negotiate a contract. And now you go into the iterative process of managing changes and renegotiating the contract until you get to a point where you terminate the contract. But the circle or the iterative element between managing changes and terminate and renegotiating the contract is where all the magic happens. But it's also where a lot of organization really drops eye of the ball because they stop, they don't get all the changes registered, they don't manage all the contract amendments correctly. It's distributed throughout the organization, and there's no common overview of things. We use vendor management as the overarching concept that does have the sourcing. It also has the contract management. Contract management is by many considered a separate discipline. We use this as an overarching concept of all of these things because we think they are so closely connected. And as you can see, we have them represented in different boxes here. So we started out in some projects having long discussion whether it was vendor management or sourcing or procurement or contract management, and we ended up saying, well, all of these things needs to be in place for you to make this work. So why don't we just look at it as one? So that's really what we do. We do appreciate that in many of your organizations, this has been distributed into different organizational functions. So you'll have a sourcing management or a sourcing, strategic sourcing part of the organization, and then you might have a contract management function sitting somewhere else, keeping track of all the contracts. It might be in legal or whatever. In our world, that's completely fine. Just make sure that you have this more holistic view of the processes that makes up the solution to the problem. We'd like to get the right prices. We'd like to have good relationships. We'd like to make sure that we handle conflicts in a structured way and so on. So this is the overarching map. I hope that that makes sense to all of you. And then, of course, sitting in your individual parts of your organizations, well, you will have responsible for some and not for others of these. So we had the primary contract value chain, which really is about making sure that we change the contract and the relationship. Then we have what we call the ongoing vendor and contract management. That's the more operational stuff. But equally important, because this is also where a lot of money basically gets out of your hands. Approve deliverables and monitor performance. Who does that? How do you do the financial controlling?
The parking guards. We have a pretty great example where we were the parking guards at a client's, where we found 6 million Danish crowns over a year. So that's equally important to make the financial controlling.
Yeah, exactly. And financial controlling is part of that is simple invoice control.
Simple invoice controlling, ensuring that you get what you pay for. And it's funny that every time that you get a wrong invoice, it's never too low. It's always too high.
Yeah. Financial controlling, managing problems as they arise, managing penalties, making sure that you actually collect the penalties. If you have put that into the contracts in order to discipline the vendor, or simply because it is part of the agreement. And then the ongoing vendor evaluation. Follow up on SLAs would belong in the first box of approving deliverables and monitoring performance, because that is extremely important. And obviously this goes down to the 4 boxes at the bottom. So we have information flowing from all of these processes to a reporting kind of process where we report to all the stakeholders. There will be some vendor risk management. This is an increasingly important part of many organizations' risk management, that is managing the vendor risk management. And obviously when you do the vendor selection, when you do the negotiation of the contract, you will get information that will go into vendor risk management. But every time there's a problem, every time you approve or not approve deliverables, and every time you have SLAs that are not met, and every time you have to collect the penalty, that will go down and influence your vendor risk management. The process of registering vendors, contracts, and we just need to take ourselves out. Yeah. Changes is really just to say that in many of the processes in the 2 value chains, you will have to register stuff, and you most likely would need to have a system to register these things in. So there's also a system element of this. And then at the very bottom here, it could have been at the very top, there's of course defining your vendor and contract management policies that drives the definition of all these processes. There's a reporting flow, so there's a number of the processes that will generate, most of them actually will generate data that goes into your reporting. There's a number of these that will impact the risk management, as I said before. There's a number of the processes where you do the most important registrations. And then we move on to And we've promised ourselves, yeah.
I think we should do this kind of briefly because you already touched upon some of them. So I think we should challenge ourselves and maybe do it in 30 seconds each and see how fast we can go through them.
Yep.
So at first, you need to define your vendor and contract policies, which includes your selection, well-defined policies for selections of vendors, some mandatory terms and conditions, the whole vendor management process, and risk management policies.
Before my 30 seconds starts, I'll just say what we do now is that we go through all of the boxes here and just give you the critical success factors for you to basically have as a reference afterwards. Okay, my 30 seconds starts now. On the requirement specification, it is of course important that if you want to do this in a structured way, there should be a way to do requirement specification. You should define policies for functional, how you describe functional requirements, how you describe non-functional requirements, and so on. So basically set up a standard for requirement specification.
Yeah, for the vendor selections, some very clear policies how they are formally approved and registered before entering your agreement, and also make a thorough assessment of newer suppliers that are based on very clear assessment criteria. And I know that the next 30 seconds are kind of cruel to have you say something about negotiating contracts within 30 seconds. So good luck, Henrik.
But what I will say is that on negotiating contracts, the critical thing is, one, that you have the right people that can do the negotiation, that you educate people in negotiating contracts, and that you have some kind of standards on how you do that. Basically, yeah, and go through the details here because there's no need for that in this presentation. We have other presentations on negotiations on our YouTube channel where you can spend 1.5 hours on that. So, on register contracts.
Yeah. So all agreements ensure that they are consistently tracked. That includes the agreements, the amendments, all changes, everything that are related to the agreement, such as term, milestone, key actors, reporting flow, etc. Everything that is linked to the contract, make sure that they are consistently tracked in an electronic contract management system.
And the changes, what we find is that the basic thing here is you need to make sure that you register the changes, that you can find the changes afterwards, that they are consistently handled, because that is really the big problem for many organizations, is that the contract they're looking at has gone through so many changes and nobody really has an overview. Yeah.
Regarding the improvement of the deliveries and monitor performance, that is really related also to the SLAs. So ensure that you will monitor the performance of the vendors and that you will not pay the invoice before formal improvement of the underlying deliverables, where you have assessed the deliverables through documented and agreed as in the contracts, and that all assessments involve the relevant stakeholders who have the necessary operational knowledge and insights.
On the financial controlling, we touched upon it before. It's basically about making sure that you pay what you need to pay and not a penny more. Invoice costs are handled according to well-defined IT accounting practices, that you basically do this structured and you make sure that you know what you're paying for. And we have been shocked from the very start of our benchmarking history by how many invoices have been paid without proper control and where there was really many errors in them.
Yeah. So without spoiling too much, this may be where the money is hidden.
It could be where a lot of money is hidden. Yeah.
Ensure to do your proper vendor evaluation, which is carried out on regularly basis on very fixed criteria, benchmarks, and that they are executed at a fixed frequency and on an ad hoc basis whenever needed.
Just a short, sharp bracket here. I mean, going back to the long versus the short tail, this is of course where you probably need one process for the big vendors and another process for the long tail. Mm. So what is the pragmatic way to handle the 100 plus vendors where you have small contracts. How do you actually do that? What are the criteria for evaluating them? How often do you do that? Yeah. The managing problems, how do you escalate? How do you make sure that problems are managed? How do you make sure that you feedback to the vendor whether or not a problem has been solved? How do you manage to collect these things in the ongoing vendor relationship, so that the 7 problems you had over the year actually goes into the vendor evaluation, and the vendor follow-up meeting that you have once a year, or however you want to do the vendor evaluation.
Ensure to manage your penalties, where you ensure a process of issuing penalties which is largely automated and manually whenever necessary. So ensure that you manage these penalties as a large part automated in your organization.
Reporting, I think we've been through that, but you decide on the level of reporting needed in your organization. This could be on the financials, it could be on the risk profile, it could be on the contract portfolio and how it develops. It could be on the problems and the status on problems. There's a lot of things we could put into to the ongoing reporting.
Yeah, and vendor risk management, I think we also touched upon, and what is provided, or what is affected here in the vendor risk management, and make sure you have an updated picture of the risk associated with all the critical vendors. For example, if you have a sales agreement, make sure that you assess the risk of, for example, if they are not executing the business anymore, if they are, yeah. So make sure to do proper risk management.
And this also often feeds into a more a non-IT way of looking at vendor risk management. Many organizations will have vendor risk management practices in place for other vendors, for example, vendors of raw materials to the primary value chain of the company. So also make sure that you are aligned with the overall vendor risk management practices, but also understand that there are specific risks associated with IT vendors that has to do with, for example, security incidents and stuff like that. And then on termination and extension of the contract, basically make sure that everybody in the organization knows when to extend a contract. So we have a lot of business where people call us in panic saying that their Microsoft agreement is up for renewal in 2 months, which is something they've known for the last 2 years and 10 months, that this would happen at that particular date. And in many cases you'll find that you find out too late that you need to extend a contract. Don't be in that situation. Make sure that you are notified in advance by your system and reporting and whatever, and make sure that you have time for preparation and negotiation.
Just for an example, for Microsoft agreements, we always advise our clients to start 9 to 12 months before the agreement ends. So you have the proper time to do your due diligence, ensure that you have the right amount of licenses, that you are terminating inactive users, that you know your user baseline when you are going into the negotiation, and that you have time for the negotiation, and that you will have this process in place for this. Yeah.
And if your excuse for not doing this in time is that we don't have time for that, we are so busy with all other kinds of things. I'm not saying that you're lazy. I'm saying that you're too few people doing this. I mean, what we find is that many organizations are hugely understaffed in the vendor management. That the processes we're talking about here are understaffed, and going back to the parking assistant metaphor from before, that's a very stupid place to be understaffed. So because there's a direct correlation between the staffing in the vendor management function and the financial performance of the contracts in the organization. We have plenty of evidence for that claim in the organizations we're working with. And as I promised, we'll get back to what is the proper staffing, really.
Yeah, so effective vendor management contracts actually require you to identify your most important goals, where we have some goals here within the financial flexibility, agility, and quality, where in the financial it's optimizing the recurring costs in the individual client relationship. You improve your analytics, your reporting, your business intelligence. You ensure yourself and your organization a higher degree of predictability in relation to the financial and the deliveries from the supplier and across the portfolio. And you ensure yourself the most optimal conditions for negotiation when you have the vendor management process in place, and that you are notified in advance so you can spend the right amount of time on optimizing your agreements beforehand and be well prepared before entering the negotiation. And then you optimize the cross-functional management and control processes to allow for cost reductions during the agreement term.
And the idea here is basically for you to take a look at this, and we'll go through the remaining 3 columns here, but basically go through this and then point out what is most important. I mean, what should really drive our process design, our staffing, our organization, our governance. So if you tell us that improving the analytics is the most important, or optimize the recurring cost is the most important, that will drive some of the process design. So the idea here is to say, okay, everything is important, but what's most important? And this is something you build into your requirement specification. It could be something you build into your vendor selection. And the important thing here is, this is, as our market overview that we issued in quarterly analytics number 1 this year, as that states, it's a pretty immature area right now. So today we have a few ways of basically describing your requirements on to ESG, but more will come as the Commission's what is it called? The legislation that regulates this is going into effect in 24. So there will be a lot more also from our side on how you actually do that, how you can do that. There are some pretty extensive ideas from the Commission on how this could be done. But I think the most important thing is this will start with you requiring the vendors to be able to report on ESG. The second phase of that will be you and the vendor agreeing on targets on ESG and basically setting targets for example, carbon emission. It's pretty immature at this point. The vendors and the big clients are, as we speak, trying to find ways to do this in a way that is operational and valuable and actually helping the environment, not just reporting for reporting's sake. So it's not an easy task. On the remaining 3, let's just go through them briefly. So financials, one area where you could have demands. Flexibility is another. Basically that you ensure that there's a flexibility among suppliers across the portfolio, consistent access to suppliers. I mean, is this important? Is it important for you to be able to pick and choose among a number of vendors? Because that will, of course, also drive the definition of some of the processes we're looking at.
Yeah, for agility, it could be an important goal to ensure that all suppliers are agile and prepared to face rising challenges within your organization, and to increase the innovation from the supplier side through structured dialogue with the suppliers about your needs and your opportunities within the agreement.
And that, of course, will influence the process where you evaluate your vendors. So you evaluate, did they deliver on time, did they deliver on budget and so on. But you will also then, if this is important, then you need to find ways to evaluate whether your vendors actually deliver the agility that you're looking for. The last one is quality, of course, which is what we in most organizations see works to some extent, that you do actually evaluate the deliveries, the deliverables from the vendor, but do you do that in a structured way? Do you report it centrally? Do you make sure that we have a common view of a particular vendor's performance across different parts of the organization? You might have a vendor that serves 4 divisions in your organization. Do you have a consolidated picture of the quality issues across that, so that you can use that in managing problems, but also in the ongoing relationship?
So here it was just for visualizing how you can do a process mapping, where this is for a request for a change for a simple agreement, where you can see we have 4 horizontal lines with contract owner, internal, externally, the IT category manager, and the system, and how this request for change is processed. And if you go to the next slide, Henrik, we have a request for a change for a complex agreement, where we see we have a lot of more layers. We have firm and legal and operational procurement that are all in the process to evaluate and comment on the change. And where we can see that it actually follows and goes further to the next slide as well, continues to the IT category manager, and how different it is from a simple to a complex agreement. Also understating that the staffing needed for more complex agreements is higher than for a lot of simple agreements. But that we will also come with some examples of where you can see the low complexity of the agreements doesn't require that high of a number of staffing, where we have the same amount of, almost the same amount of agreements with a lot of more complexity, really driving the staffing requirements.
And I think this goes back to the short versus the long tail discussion. Yeah. Basically, make sure that you have a process for the simple and a process for the more complex. Yeah. And these are just examples, and you're not supposed to basically understand the full complexity of the process here. It's mainly to say it's a good idea to have these processes drawn. This is a swim lane kind of process mapping, which works for many, and it basically collects the process steps. At the lower line, the systems we are using to capture the information, and then we have the checklists in the gray boxes. Those are the things that we need to make sure we have under control in each step. So these are the data we want to collect in each step. And in our presentation, this presentation contains, I think this was a request for change. We also, we have a lot of other. We have a lot of other examples. Just to show you an example of a swim lane process where we have this request for change in a contract. Exactly. So. Yeah. Where's all the money hidden? Yeah. It's all about the money here at Petersen. So we believe these are the processes you need to have under control in order to basically make sure that you don't overpay for your external services. Also really understated by what we have seen in our clients. So this is really where we see the money in all our clients. Yeah, and it's also to say, investing in these areas, making sure that the staffing in these areas are correct, is also what will bring you the money back. So this is where the business case also lies, you could say. And if you're going to ask for more money, more people for vendor management, make sure you focus on these first, because that's the way you'll repay the investment fastest. And just to say, I mean, I think there's no surprise in that the area where you negotiate contracts is an important one. Yeah. Nevertheless, we see a lot of contracts entered without any negotiation at all. a need arises in the organization, a vendor comes in the door with a solution to meet the need, everybody is happy. We've solved the problem, and the vendor tells you that it's 2 million Danish kroner, and you are happy because there's a good business case in spending 2 million Danish kroner on solving the problem. But who knows? Yeah. There's a good chance you could have got that from 1.5 million Danish kroner, and perhaps even worse, the 1.5 versus 2 million Danish kroner on the investment is probably not the most important thing. The most important thing is the ongoing maintenance, the ongoing license cost or whatever, the ongoing cost from when you bought the system 10, 15 years ago and what you've been paying since.
Yeah, and just driving the line back to the software agreements where you saw how arbitrarily priced it is. Remember to negotiate your software agreements and nonetheless all your IT agreements, because we have visualized how arbitrarily priced these agreements are. Understating the point.
We're looking into a company right now that are buying stuff that's not entirely IT, big electronic apparatus for specific purposes. And when you buy that kind of equipment at 10 or 20 million Danish kroner a piece, there's always a negotiation on the investment versus the ongoing maintenance of those. And what are the guidelines you apply here? How long do you look into the future when you calculate what's most attractive to you? And in many cases, we've seen many cases where the focus was solely on the investment, and you chose the cheapest one in terms of investment, but the ongoing maintenance was much higher than the competitors and much higher than you could have negotiated. Investing in negotiation is investing in people that actually have time to do negotiation, because you will tell me, and I know that it's true, that we really don't have time to negotiate all contracts properly. And that's in our world, that's just a choice from the organization side. If you don't invest in that point, if you don't invest in negotiating good contracts, you won't get good contracts. You will pay a lot of money. And it's basically the same when we go on to the next one. On the termination is not really where a lot of money lies, but in renegotiating the contracts. How often do you renegotiate your contracts? You should renegotiate your IT operations contract every third year.
There you said it.
Right, because after 3 years, it's most likely that the market price has dropped to a point where it actually justifies renegotiating the contract, even if it's midterm. And look at our specific webcasts on that topic. Then there's financial controlling. You've been into that.
I've been into that. I've helped a client where we did financial controlling, mainly this is just the parking guards, ensuring that our client get what they are paying for and that the invoice is correct. Just as an example, it's a bigger firm, and we found 6 million over a year in wrong invoicing, and it's funny enough, it's never an invoice reflecting lower services. It's always the wrong amounts on the other side.
Yeah. I think the best example of this is the understaffed department in the Danish taxation services that was supposed to check on stock. I don't know the extra, but udbytteskat. You know, basically the poor controlling there cost the Danish taxpayers 12 billion Danish kroner. Yeah. It's a bad place to save money. What do you say? Trust is good, control is better. Yeah. So then we have the penalties. The penalties is in my opinion quite an interesting thing, because penalty is, of course, getting your money back. But claiming the penalty is also the most you could say potent way of telling your vendor that you are not satisfied with what they are delivering. So you could have tons of meetings telling them that you're not really satisfied and you think it doesn't, them not meeting SLAs is bad for your business, but actually claiming the penalty is when you get people's attention in many ways. There's a lot of things to be said about penalties and whether it's the best way to incentivize vendors to deliver. We don't think that's the case. We don't think that penalties are the best way to incentivize vendors to deliver good quality. There's a lot of other things you should do before. But when you have penalties in your contract, you actually paid for them. You paid for that clause. And utilizing that is also a means of communication. The last one here, the vendor evaluation. If you have a set structure, a set process of evaluating the vendors, taking them into meetings, that will be the vendor evaluation process is always also where you find out that things doesn't work, you need to change them, and where you'll save money by changing things that doesn't work. So that's why there's a lot of money hidden in actually evaluating your vendors, finding out what doesn't work, fix it. Okay.
So now we get to whether you should centralize or decentralize your vendor management.
Yeah. People come to us and ask, should we centralize it or should we decentralize it? And we say, well, that depends.
So there are some aspects to consider before you centralize or decentralize your vendor management. And that's you need a general strategy for the centralization of the functions in the company. The sizing of the task, does it make sense to centralize it? The compliance requirements, should we centralize for compliance and control purposes? The expected benefits of the centralizations, and do you have enough resources to handle the centralization?
Yeah, because there's obviously benefits of decentralizing things and centralizing things. With vendor management, we've seen that decentralization generally leads to lower efficiency in the vendor management. But not everything should be centralized necessarily. And it is important, the first point is important, that if you are a company where a lot of things are centralized, then it makes more natural sense to centralize vendor management. But if you are more of a multi-local, decentralized kind of company, then of course you will, by centralizing vendor management, you will of course go up against the normal way of doing things with all the cultural and practical problems that might give you. So it is always a good thing, like with sourcing, like with all other kinds of issues that has a huge impact on what you're doing, to take a look at how do we do this with other things. But
and now we come with an example of a centralized vendor management where we have the central unit either executes, participates or coordinates, or is informed. So where the central unit executes is within the financial controlling and the management of the penalties. Where the central unit participates is in the vendor selection, the negotiation, the termination or the renegotiation of the contracts, the management of the problems and the vendor evaluation. And where they are only informed is in the requirement specifications, the management of the changes and the improvement of the deliveries, monitoring the performance, the SLAs, etc.
Yeah, you could say this is an example of an organization where, I'll just get ourselves in here. The example here is of an organization that actually said, okay, of the operational processes, we actually only want 2 of them to be handled by the central organization. The financial controlling and the penalties. We'll do that centrally. You don't have to worry about that decentral or in the decentralized divisions or departments of the organization. Whereas the rest, all the light blue and the middle light blue processes would be carried out to a large extent by the decentralized units, but the centralized vendor management function will either participate darker blue, middle blue, or will just be informed the lighter blue. But as you can see at the bottom, the centralized vendor management function will do the reporting, will do the vendor risk management, will do make sure that everything is registered, and will define the vendor and contract management policies. So that is also, so when central unit participates in vendor selection, in negotiating the contract, it could either be by making sure that the policies are understood and applied, or it could be by deploying specialists to help negotiate contracts. Yeah. But the contract negotiation is carried out and the responsibility is decentralized. This is an example, and we encourage you all to basically take this and discuss with yourself who is responsible for which of the processes in your organization. Fully centralized is one way. Fully decentralized is another. A setup where part of the processes are basically handled decentralized with some assistance from a centralized unit is of course also an option.
And now to ensuring that you have the optimal staffing to ensure optimal vendor management. Now we will provide you with some examples on what key metrics do you need to look at, how do we benchmark it here in Zangenberg, and some concrete examples of the optimal staffing from our benchmark database. So we have some key metrics to use when we benchmark your FTEs in organizations, where we have assessed some very key metrics that we see drive the amount of staffing that are needed regarding vendor management. And that's the number of suppliers.
Perhaps before we go through it, this is part of a bigger framework where we say all what we call cross-functional areas in an IT organization, the management, the strategy, architecture, technology, the portfolio management, the supplier management, and project management. These are areas where the proper staffing can be benchmarked. And what you see here, the metrics driving the number of FTEs you need. So when you look at the number of FTEs you need for strategy, architecture, technology, and security, it's the number of employees, the maintenance cost, it's the number of development platforms, number of database platforms, operating platforms, and special governance or legal requirements. These are the metrics that will drive how many people you need for strategy architecture.
And then we go concretely to the supplier management, the contract license management, etc. Where what we see drive the amount of staffing that are needed is the number of suppliers, the number of agreements, and the total economic volume, which is, you can say, it's how complex your agreements are. So if you have very few number of agreements but a high total economic volume, it could be said that you have some very complex agreements, which will then drive the amount of staffing that are needed. So when we come out to our clients, we use these key metrics when we benchmark your FTEs.
There's actually one missing, because there's one missing, and that is are you a public sector entity or you're a private sector entity? Because if you are public,
some tender requirements.
If you have requirements for RFPs, then that will drive it even further up. Okay, so this is an anonymized real life example, and the interesting thing here is we actually did a benchmark for this specific organization, company A, and when we do this, it is with the benchmark is a range from a peer group of similar companies. And the range is quite broad because this is not exact science. And of course, the metrics we described before are the main drivers, but there are other drivers, but we can do it to a certain level of complexity. So what you get is a benchmark minimum and a benchmark maximum. And as you can see here, company A is actually just above the minimum when you look at the cross-functional functions in total.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing here is, of course, that this particular organization is significantly below the benchmark on vendor and contract management.
Yeah.
And on Scrum as well, by the way. But but this is not an atypical example. We often see this. It could be a result of a fast-growing number of contracts and vendors where the staffing simply didn't follow that growth, and believing that you can handle the double amount of contract with the same amount of people is of course completely naive and crazy, and this is what we find is that while the number of contracts have changed significantly, the staffing doing the vendor management has been pretty constant in many organizations. So looking at this tells you that, well, you are back actually 10 people short here, at least 15 people short almost. So hiring more people for vendor management would be like hiring the first parking guards in a very big city, and something you simply should do.
And just some case examples from our database where we have a small private entity and a large public entity, to also show you how a higher total economic volume and the requirement for RFP drives the amount of staffing that is needed. So for the small private entity, we have actually a high number of vendors and agreements, but a low total volume, indicating that the complexity is not that high. There are no requirements for RFP, which indicates that the optimal amount of staffing for the vendor management should be between 6 or 10 people. Where when we look at the large public entity, which have the requirement for the RFP, not that many more vendors, around 150 more agreements, but an increased amount of total economic volume, which drive this benchmark up to 25 to 30 FTEs in managing the vendor management. So just to, then you can compare yourself and your organization where you would look at this or be in this spend, or how you can say, So just some case examples from our database.
Yeah, and I think it might be worth just digging a little deeper into the numbers because we love numbers and data. I think it's important. If you look at the small private entity, this also talks to the short versus the long tail. In this example, you can see that there are 334 agreements and a total value of only 85 million Danish kroner, which means that the average deal, the average contract here is worth 300,000 approximately. And that means that the long tail of in almost all companies there is the 10 largest contracts makes up 70% of the total spend, something like that. Perhaps it could be could be a little more level, but we usually find that a few big contracts makes up a significant part of the volume, making the long tail quite small. And in this case, the long tail must be, and it is, consisting of very small, a lot of very small agreements. And in that case, you need to industrialize the way you handle them, because the value of managing a 150,000 kroner contract, the value of handling that probably can be, perhaps 10%, perhaps 15%, but nothing more than 10,000, 20,000 kroner a year. So spending a lot of hours on that doesn't really make sense. So you need to make sure that you do that in a structured way. Perhaps you do the vendor evaluation once every second year. Perhaps you apply the haircut approach which is basically saying that every vendor is told, every vendor within, say, application maintenance is told that they are expected to provide contracts for the coming year at a 10% lower rate than the years before, because all things being equal, we expect the load to be lower, and then you manage the way that the vendors return on that. Those are the kind of ways you can industrialize things. Make sure that systems do most of the task in terms of reporting and follow up on this and reporting back to the vendors. So make sure that you have a low touch. This is why you can do with 6 to 10 people in that case. While on the other example, you have a much higher average value on each on the individual agreements, and therefore also we use value as a proxy for complexity. The complexity is probably also higher.
You will gain a higher amount of money when doing financial controlling, etc., etc. There will be more money hidden in each of the boxes when the contract is larger.
And it's a public sector entity that in itself lifts the value, because it means that basically everything needs to go into a public tender at least every, if you stretch the rules, 6 years. So there's some simple mathematics there in terms of how much time do you need to set aside to reissue the RFP on a regular basis for basically 502 agreements. So obviously this scales as well.
Yeah, but just to show you some case examples, that if you are sitting in an organization that have approximately the same key metrics as the small private entity, but you are 3 people, I think it's a pretty good sign that maybe you should upscale your staffing.
As we mentioned before, this is something we have we have basically a benchmark in place here. So those of you who want to explore this in more detail, please give us a call. Talking to us is free. Having us do calculations for you will in many cases cost you a little money, but give us a call if you want to discuss the staffing and the setup of your vendor management processes. We're eager to go into more details there.
And now for the
for
one everyone have been waiting for.
We have 18 minutes now.
We have 18 minutes. We have to make them efficient. How to health check your current vendor management.
This is without using us.
This is without using us. So you only do it yourself. It's the DIY method, the cowboy approach, as we call it, why we have inserted a little Lucky Luke picture on the right. So at first you have to divide all your agreements into 4 categories. IT operations, application maintenance, software, and development agreements.
Right. So
that's pretty easy.
That's pretty easy.
You have 4 piles, and then you have one with IT operations, etc. Then you take all your agreements, and then you have maybe colored them. You have some blue, some pink, some green, etc. And then you line up all your agreements and look at start with the largest ones. So
and this is of course back to Michael's. So there's a long tail, but there's some big ones.
Yeah. And now for each of your piles. So then you take your first one, company A. This is the largest agreement that you have. Okay, it's an IT operation agreement. How do you manage that one, Henrik?
Well, what you do is basically you ask yourself the question: when did we enter the agreement? Because looking at the indices for server operation and storage operation, there is, and the graph we are showing here could trick it a little, but there is a significant price drop over the last 3 to 4 years. Not so much over the last year, but if you have a contract that is basically more than 3 years or more, then it and hasn't been basically price adjusted, then it's most likely that there will be savings to be had.
This is from a current client on the right, one of our clients, where they were actually at benchmark when they entered the agreement, but due to the price developments in the IT operations, they are 100,000 Danish crowns from benchmark in the current agreement.
Yeah. So this is the way to basically health check your contract, to say, okay, how old is the contract? Did we price adjust it? If we didn't, and it's 3 years or more, it's most likely that there's something to be gained. Yeah. You can of course go into even further details if you have a quarterly analytics subscription at only 15,000 Danish kroner. So if you have that very, very price efficient and cheap, not cheap, just price efficient subscription, you'll be able to go in and check individual unit prices. Yeah. So you go in and say, okay, and a good place to start is on your storage prices, because they will probably make up, storage and server prices will probably make up quite a significant part of your IT operational contract. So take a look at them and compare to the latest quarterly prices on those, and you will also get an indication as to whether there will be money to be saved. So IT operational contracts are actually quite simple. It's quite simple to identify the most obvious candidates for renegotiation. And remember, there's always the option to renegotiate an IT operational agreement, even if you are not at the end of the term, because vendors are very, very eager to make sure that you extend your contracts beyond the current term. So that's always something you can put in play when you want to lower the price mid-term of a long-term ITO contract. So ITO, actually the simplest part to DIY health check.
Yeah. Then we have the application maintenance. The next agreement you look at, that's an MS agreement. And then you have to compare your ticket count and your price over the last year. So assess your statistics on incidents for a minimum of 3 to 4 years. Has the number of tickets decreased and has the price decreased? That's basically what you do. So on the right we have an example where you have some development during the period, where you see the number of incidents rise actually above the fixed price AMS costs, but then the tickets slowly decrease again. And this is actually an arbitrary example. What we usually see is that you have a fixed price, and then the number of incidents just slowly decrease as time went by. And then in the end you have a pretty big price gap from actually the number of incidents to your price.
If you call us with the number of incidents and the price you are paying, we can give you a very, and that's for free, by the way, then we can give you a very overall indication as to whether this seems to be in line with what we would expect, or whether you are far from the expected price range. But you will have applications at the long tail where you might have very few incidents a year. These applications are just running, and you're paying perhaps quite a substantial amount for the ability to actually have bugs corrected. There might be other ways to construct that agreement, and if there's big discrepancy between the ticket load, the number of tickets, and the money paid, you should definitely go in and try and optimize that.
Yeah. Software agreements are difficult. So we have put up some proposed key metrics, whether you have spent how many number of proposals you've got, time you spend on the negotiation, and the time you spend on preparation.
This is really
they are difficult. So you could also just call us and send your software agreements. But we have put up some proposed key metrics where we see a possibility of a suboptimal agreement.
Because this talks into the nature of software negotiations and the way most software vendors approach these negotiations, they have a lot of people, they have a lot of time, so they're quite stubborn, you could say. They will submit a lot of proposals before they actually submit a very good proposal. So if you have had less than 3 proposals in when you entered the software agreement, if you spent less than 2 months and less than 40 hours on that, the most likely result of a benchmark would be you are significantly above the benchmark in terms of pricing. So this just to say that software prices are a result of your negotiation situation, but also a result of your negotiation efforts.
Yeah. And then when you consider your development project cost and rate card agreements, we have also proposed some key metrics where you can actually look directly into the agreement whether this is reflected in your current development agreement. So is there any discounts related to the committed volume that you have? Does the agreement distinguish between seniority, nearshore, offshore resources, competencies, and does the blended rate actually reflect the actual distribution? If not, it could be the possibility of a suboptimal agreement.
Exactly. Of course, when it comes to rate card agreements, consulting framework agreements and so on, we are in a situation now where the market is quite fluid and prices are salary are rising and so are the hourly rates. So this is not an area where you should expect to gain huge discounts or huge savings from proper vendor management. What you should expect is to get a price that reflects the volume, a good differentiation, as we say, between different kind of rates. And then, of course, in these contracts, the quality aspect could be even more important. How do you actually measure the competences of people that you have? Are you able to demand people to be replaced if they do not meet your standards and so on? So there might be a number of other things than just price. We don't care about. We only care about pricing. No, obviously we don't, but again, this is our focus is really on the pricing, and these are the issues that you should focus on when it comes to pricing.
And for both the software and the rate card agreements, if you are in doubt, just send them to us, and we'll give you a clear indication if they are too expensive.
As mentioned before, we do health check of contracts, so and that is a free service from us. You send us your contract, we tell you whether we believe this is a contract worth negotiating and worth benchmarking, which is of course a payable service from us afterwards. But having contract health checked is a free service. So
we are soon through this webinar, and just at the end, we will of course encourage you to use the resources that are available at our quarterly analytics, which you also mentioned earlier, Henrik.
They are in Danish.
They're in Danish, but we have a lot of tools where you can check your vendor management, or as just said, send your agreements to us for a health check, and then we'll give you a clear indication if you're paying too much for your office license.
We also have a series, I don't think we have it here, do we? No. We also have a series specifically on contract management made together with Falk Ekdal, who is also represented here today. So on the processes that are very specific to the management of the contracts. So we have a series on that as well. As well as you can see on the right side here, just behind us, a number of playbooks on how to conduct the different kind of negotiations. And of course, we have the big special issue on quarterly on negotiation together with our book on negotiating IT contracts. So there's a lot of resources that you can get from us if you want to dig deeper. And don't hesitate to call us or mail us if you want some more details. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
See you later.